We, the undersigned, protest the misassignment of $1 million to the Hawaii Department of Health. These funds had been requested by the people of Hawaii for the express purpose of supporting existing research already being conducted, as extensive testimony in both House and Senate committees made very clear. There was no opportunity for public input on the last moment amendment, which changed the recipient of this funding. This was a dirty trick on the part of politicians in Honolulu to maintain a status quo of which the Hawaii Department of Health is very much a core part of the problem.
We have so much research to do on this disease. I'm sorry that the $1 million that the legislature passed through this past year for a 2-year period was given to the Department of Health alone. They do not do research. The only thing that they can do is launch public education campaigns. And until we know better information about how to prevent rat lungworm disease, we're not able to give really valid information to the public. For instance, just washing your vegetables alone, that's not sufficient. You can easily miss a juvenile semi-slug in that process and then ingest it and then acquire the disease. So washing alone is not sufficient. We don't know if a 5-micron level filter is sufficient to keep the disease from passing through catchment water. So these are things that we need to know definitively how to teach the public to protect themselves.
We demand this funding be redirected to the original recipients for whom it had been requested, with the benefit of public testimony, and approved unanimously in all House and Senate committees. We also protest as distortions, misdirection, and ineffective policy the statements presented as substantiated fact and bold initiatives to the public by Governor Ige, Dr. Pressler, and Mr. Enright at their press conference. Specifically, that produce is made safe by simply washing. Angiostrongyliosis in Hawaii is quote-unquote rare, and there have been, quote, relatively few incidents, unquote.
Some people I know have become very ill, been injured by this disease. That, of course, provoked concern. When year after year we see a bill for funding be killed, and then this last year we see that bill receive hundreds of pieces of testimony from the public in favor and be approved unanimously in House subcommittees.
And I think it's way past time when something more serious needs to be done.
And then approved unanimously in Senate subcommittees, only to go to a joint session and have an amendment introduced at the last moment with no opportunity for public input that changes the recipient away from actual research laboratories that have been doing the good work and putting it into the Department of Health, which, the Department of Health, its role in this has been problematic.
The research proposed by Department of Health being focused on the wrong questions entirely, and the public education proposed by Department of Health reinventing a wheel already produced by existing work on Hawaii Island.
And yet we know that the research laboratory has been producing very good results. And so to change the designation of the recipient away from the lab that's been doing good work to the Department of Health, against the wishes of the hundreds of people who provided testimony. And when the House and Senate committees all voted unanimously in support, that just seems unconscionable. I mean, it's like treacherous, a knife in the back. Senator Ruderman was betrayed on this, as were the people of Hawaii.
For all these points, we demand Governor Ige and Dr. Pressler cite their references and provide proof with scientific evidence backing their statements.
It was upsetting enough to want to do something, and so I came up with this open letter presenting the various issues as I saw them with that press conference, assertions being made as fact, which in truth are unsupportable. There's no evidence to support several of the things that were said. There was misdirection on the part of the governor and Dr. Pressler in downplaying the severity of what's going on. There have been mortalities. There have been pediatric mortalities. People have died, children have died as a result. Was there a word about that in the televised press conference? Zero, none. It's not right what's happening. Well, what's happened for years is that people in the Department of Health and Dr. Parks, or Dr. Sarah Park has been among them, have been saying that this was a lifestyle disease. And the subtext there is only if you're ignorant and poor would you have a problem with this. Well, guess what? Maui and Kauai and Oahu are encountering this disease as well, because it actually is a function of the ideal intermediate host, the semi-slug Parmarion martensi, spreading in those areas, and that's why all of a sudden we're seeing acute cases in those areas. Parmarion martensi came to Hawaii about the same year that the coqui frog did. The thing is, you can hear coqui frogs, and as their range expands and their population increases, it's very conspicuous. Now, the ideal intermediate host for Angiostrongylus, the disease, is from China. The slug is from Asia. And it made it to the island at about the same time as the coqui frogs. And its range has been expanding and its population has been increasing, but people have not been noticing because they can't hear it going, coqui, coqui, but we should be paying attention and not covering it up, not sweeping it under the rug, not hoping to preserve some sort of imagined status quo that everything's okay for the sake of the tourism industry. The tourism industry is going to take a hard hit when it all comes out, as it has started to, thanks to some wealthy honeymooners from the Bay Area getting sick at a five-star resort over on Maui, and all of a sudden it's in the San Francisco Chronicle and the New York Times. Well, that's not how you want to be dealing with this issue, you know, retroactively trying to do damage control. It's not a disease of lifestyle. It's not a disease of the poor and the ignorant. It's a disease of anybody who encounters the intermediate host in their food.
PSA that we wanted to share with you that you will be seeing soon on television.
The good news is you can prevent it by simply washing your produce thoroughly.
Where's the evidence? In order for that statement to be verified as scientifically accurate, Dr. Pressler and Dr. Park and the Hawaii State Department of Health would have had to conduct a bioassay taking Hawaii produce with slime trails of Parmarion martensi infected with Angiostrongylus cantonensis and fed that produce to rats under controlled conditions where the rats were known to be clean before they ate the infected produce. The slime trails we're talking about here. Then you wait a certain period of time for the incubation period to proceed and sacrifice the rats and look inside them and see, do we have adult worms reproducing in the hearts and lungs of these rats? Do we, when we check the fecal material of these rats, find the first stage larvae in their fecal material? If you do all that and you find nothing, then you can say, probably it's safe to eat produce that has been washed. But unless you do that, you have no basis, no evidence to be able to say simply washing is enough. There's no basis in evidence for that.
We'll air a series of public service announcements on television and radio stations statewide throughout the year. In addition, our epidemiology and vector control programs, in partnership with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, will conduct a targeted, concurrent rat, slug, and snail sample survey that's guided by our current disease data.
We denounce Department of Health spokesperson Dr. Sarah Park for asserting prophylactic treatment with albendazole in Hawaii is, quote, medically reprehensible, unquote. We demand she publicly retract this statement, along with delivering a public apology to all who may have been harmed as a result of this profoundly flawed and irresponsible declaration.
My concern with what Dr. Park said is that, and I am not a physician, I'm not a clinician, I'm simply a concerned parent, a concerned community member and farmer. And my understanding regarding albendazole is that its toxicity is very low in humans. Now, what I know from firsthand experience with my friends and neighbors is that the hazard presented by this disease is very high. People can be permanently neurologically damaged by exposure to this disease. They can be killed by this disease and have been. So, if a parent brings a child in to a clinician in Hawaii and says, I believe that my child has ingested a slug, a semi-slug, the clinician is faced with a dilemma. The physician can go ahead, like a friend of mine, a physician in Australia, and say, oh, this child's been exposed. We need to administer albendazole to clear the possibility of the parasite in this child's system, and do so. And you may never know whether the parasite was actually there or not, but the parasite was cleared if it was.
In the infectious disease world, I can tell you the treatment using albendazole for parasitic infections is highly controversial for roundworms, and primarily because for a number of reasons. One is that it's thought that by some folks that if you treat with albendazole and you're killing off, or if you actually achieve die-off of worms, you may actually worsen the disease. And so to treat with just albendazole, you could actually worsen symptoms in the patient. But aside from all that, albendazole works on the adult worm. We know that the infection occurs from third stage larvae. So you're using a medication potentially that does not work on, and then you're reassuring the patient. In my mind, as an infection, if I put on my clinical infectious disease hat, it'd be reprehensible to use albendazole like that and reassure a patient. So which is why if I actually were consulting on a patient, my recommendation is to make sure to monitor that patient very closely, and if there are concerning signs and symptoms, to utilize prednisone steroid, and to actually monitor the patient and to follow that patient with appropriate steroid therapy. So it's a very, to just outright, just because I'm afraid I got infected, to use albendazole, reassuring the patient, that's reprehensible from a medical standpoint. You're falsely reassuring them because you don't know what you just did.
Or you can say, well, but the Department of Health says that it's medically reprehensible to try to prevent this from developing. We should wait till we actually see symptoms. Well, when there are symptoms, that means that the larvae are burrowing around in the brain and doing damage, potentially permanent, potentially catastrophic damage. So when you look at the risk-benefit analysis on this, why wait until there is potentially catastrophic, permanent damage or death? Why not use, as treatment a treatment regime is being followed elsewhere, why not use this antihelminthic to remove the possibility that it's going to do that damage? But it also, I believe, crosses the blood-brain barrier, which is something that ivermectin does not. And you see, one of the problems with over-the-counter medications, there being a reluctance on the part of PAs and RNs and MDs to prescribe these over-the-counter medications that can clear this, is that people may be going to the local feed supply store and getting a product that was made for animals and dosing themselves with that. The dosage could be completely inappropriate. The medication itself could be completely inappropriate. Ivermectin, and again, I'm not a physician, but my understanding is that it does not cross the blood-brain barrier effectively, unlike albendazole, which does cross the blood-brain barrier very effectively. And so if the larvae have already made it inside the brain, dosing yourself with ivermectin is potentially doing a lot of harm and very little good. By contrast, the albendazole may be doing a great deal of benefit with very low risk. That said, all of this should be done under the care of a physician, as Dr. Martell always says, there should also be evaluation for whether inflammation should be treated at the same time with the steroids and so on. And really, people should be going to somebody like Dr. Martell for treatment, and people like Dr. Martell should not have to have always in the back of their mind, oh, but the Department of Health has warned us that it's medically reprehensible to use the nemicide in this manner. I think that deserves a lot of scrutiny and a retraction.
Well, folks, that's a strongly worded statement. But being quiet and being really, really understated and polite has not been getting results. What can just one person do? Well, please do come by the table today and add your name to the almost 200 signatories on this letter. The people united can never be defeated. Mahalo.
The proprietor of Jungle Love was by and signed and invited me to bring it by and leave it there. And I'll try to see about getting a website set up where people could sign online as well. We have, I think, about 200 signatures today. That should be a signal to folks that it's not just one lone crank who's upset about what he heard at that press conference. There are over 200 people who have signed this saying, no, we agree, this is really not appropriate.